So how much copy pasting do you think I can get away with in this script? Sonic Heroes, the first main series Sonic game developed for non-Sega consoles, the first multi-platform Sonic game overall, and the first 3D Sonic game whose initials can't be used to refer to a serious crime. Although I'm horrified to think what the sequel to Sexual Assault would be. This is a children's game, what am I talking about? Yet another game I grew up with, and the first in the series where I own an original copy. Sonic Heroes is sort of a sequel to the Sonic Adventure games, though more so in terms of characters than gameplay or story. We get Rouge and Shadow returning from Adventure 2, Big and Amy returning from Adventure 1, Cream the Rabbit transitioning over from Sonic Advance 2, 3 characters returning from the obscure 32X game Knuckles Chaotix, the brand new E100 robot Omega, and the grand return of Sonic CD's iconic rival Metal Sonic. Nowadays, most of these characters are considered mainstays for the series, at least for spin-offs like Sonic Riders and Sonic Racing. It's all pretty good for the game's legacy, and within the fandom, this game still holds a decent amount of respect. So, what do I think? Fuck this game. Sonic Heroes was developed by Sonic Team USA, like Sonic Adventure 2, complete with returning director Takashi Iizuka and producer Yuji Naka. It was made by 19 people over 20 months, and my god, I don't know a lot about game development, but that doesn't sound like enough. And according to Iizuka, the level design was handled entirely by himself and one other developer, presumably Aitaro Toyoda. And then, according to a 2016 Game Informer article, where Sonic went wrong, Aitaro got sick and stopped showing up, so Iizuka had to start doing it all himself. He worked without sleeping, lost over 20 pounds, and ended up making the final levels on his own. All for a 72 on Metacritic. To be clear, I don't want this review or any other negative review I make to be seen as a hit piece on the developers of the game. Heroes, like so many Sonic games, was created under an absurdly tight deadline with little support from the higher-ups at Sega. And I especially think Iizuka deserves to be appreciated for his work, even if you don't think the games he made are that good. Like, I don't even like this game, but all the levels being made by 2 people in less than 2 years is actually impressive. I'm going to criticize this game pretty heavily, but I want to make it very clear. I don't blame any of the developers for the issues here. Not even the special stage programmers. Been a bit since I started one of these reviews with a plot synopsis, but thankfully the storyline isn't much of a focus in this game. Sometime before the game begins properly, Eggman gets locked in a small room by Metal Sonic, who decided to turn himself into an ultimate form of himself, maybe based on Chaos and the Bio-Lizard, but also maybe just looking like a dragon by coincidence. Either way, to do so, he poses as Eggman, kidnaps Froggy and a chow named Chocola while looking like Sonic, sends Sonic and friends a letter saying Eggman's going to take over the world in 3 days, and maybe does something to provoke Rouge into action. In any case, Sonic teams up with Knuckles and Tails to stop Eggman, while Amy teams up with Big and Cream to find Sonic and save Chocola and Froggy. Meanwhile, 3 detectives called Team Chaotix receive a radio from a mystery client offering them tons of money to do stuff, with SPO being skeptical, Vector saying they need the money, and Charmy being 6. You know, I don't know how seriously this manual should be taken as canon, especially nowadays. Like, even if Tails was 8 during Heroes, do we think he still is in Frontiers? It also says Dr. Eggman was a feminist, which I'm pretty sure is Japanese for man whore. The most interesting storyline is definitely Team Dark, since it actually acts as a direct follow-up to the adventure games. Rouge decides to break into Eggman's treasure room? I don't know. She says she found his secret treasure after putting in a passcode, and she finds a room with 2 things in it. A powered-down robot who boots up upon her entering, and a stasis pod clearly containing Shadow the Hedgehog. The robot decides to start shooting the room up as Shadow emerges, saying he needs to destroy all of Eggman's robots, while Shadow starts to attack back, and then Rouge stops them, I guess. Omega is apparently bitter about getting locked in a room for some time. Shadow has no memory whatsoever, so now they're going to work together to find Eggman, I guess. Maybe kill him. Then after the 4th boss, a destroyed robot version of Shadow appears, somehow. I remember there's actually been some disagreement among the fandom about whether the Shadow we follow in this game is actually the real Shadow. See, the ultimate reveal at the end of the Team Dark campaign is that Eggman has hordes of robotic replicas of Shadow now, so there's a question mark on Shadow's own realness. This is followed up on in the next game, but the problem is it's pretty definitively clear that the Shadow in that game is the real Shadow, with the androids being very different. So the question is whether the Shadow seen in androids... Wait. Did I seriously call it androids? I meant to say heroes, like Sonic Heroes. What the fuck is wrong with me? Is the same Shadow as in that game, or if this one cutscene indicates that the Shadow we play as in the latter half is different from the Shadow that Rouge found. Personally, I don't know what the writers intended, but Metal Sonic says he's copied the Ultimate Lifeform data from this fight, so clearly at least someone here is the real Shadow. But who knows, I wrote this script in June, maybe the Generations remake is going to reveal this was actually his evil twin the whole time. At the end of their campaigns, Team Rose rescues Chocola and Froggy, Team Sonic destroys another fake Eggman, Team Dark finds those hordes of Shadow androids, and Team Chaotix find Eggman and beat him up for not having money. After that, Eggman explains that Metal Sonic is evil, Metal Sonic announces he's going to become the new Overlord, a bunch of characters pull out the Chaos Emeralds from Hammer's base, Sonic decides to go Super alongside Tails and Knuckles, and the other teams decide to buy them time by beating up Metal Sonic's new form. Then Team Sonic does go Super, they beat up Metal Dragon Sonic, and then the ending plays out with Eggman getting violently shook down for Dash, yet again. Well, that's a plot. The game is a definite step back in terms of writing from Adventure 2, or even Adventure 1, frankly. I didn't even touch on the team battles where the different campaigns intersect and people fight with just the weakest of justifications. It's telling that the most understandable reason we have for one of these is Amy wants to force Sonic to marry her and her team members want their friends back. Of course, it's clearly not a mistake that the story is put on the back burner for this game. It's intended to be more focused on the gameplay, and that's very understandable. It is, however, an undeniable weak point when the other games in this era of the franchise are primarily remembered for having elaborate stories. But hey, at least we still have cutscenes. These should be good, right?
Yeah, time to rock and roll!
Okay. Well, the game looks like it looks. We get a decent number of reused assets from Adventure 2, most notably the boxes and some rails. However, there are also clear differences, with the different level themes all looking distinct from the adventure levels, and most if not all character models being reworked. On a moment-to-moment basis, the game looks pretty good. It's clearly a lot brighter and poppier than the last two games, but it works with the game's overall lighter tone. There are definitely oddities, though. During standard gameplay, most characters don't actually have mouths, the pre-rendered cutscenes are just as obviously out of place as in Adventure 2, and in general the game's appearance is mostly in the range between decent to good, without reaching any sort of greatness. So interesting to talk about, isn't it? I love trying to explain how something is good enough but not great, always fun to talk about how something isn't worth talking about. As for the sound design, well, the music is good. It's not exactly notably good. This isn't like Adventure 2 where 5 different songs have become completely iconic. It's more like Sonic 2 or 3 with great and catchy tracks that can still fall out of your memory when you aren't listening to them. There are exceptions, of course. The title theme is a jam that has rightfully become a fan favorite. The final boss theme is genuinely incredible, and the Team Chaotix theme song is so ridiculously corny it wraps back around to being awesome. Unfortunately, not all of the lyrical themes are that great. Team Dark and Team Rose's themes are decent but forgettable, and Team Sonic's theme, We Can, only sticks out in my mind because it somehow manages to be the wrong kind of cheesy and too referential of the game. Even more so than the song literally named after the game. As for the actual level tracks, like I said, they aren't the most memorable, but they are more than good enough. The problem with the game isn't the music, it's, well...
Leave it to me!
Level up! Good!
Let's go!
God, these characters never shut up. The voice acting on the whole is rough. Omochao returns as a tutorial character and has gone from fairly decent to completely obnoxious. The returning voice actors range from about consistent with the adventure games to shockingly lackluster. And most of the new voice actors come from the Corkery family, and while I'm not gonna criticize the 8-year-old voicing Tails or the 13-year-old voicing Charmy, I will point out their dad doesn't do that much better as Espio. But again, the voice acting itself isn't the problem, it's that just about every action, encounter, and set piece in the game triggers at least one voice line. The funny moments it inspires, like Knuckles constantly saying shit, are largely outnumbered by just the annoyance of the constant noise. It's not good. I don't like muting a Sonic game to listen to something else when the music is so famously the good part, especially when the gameplay is, well, this. Sonic Heroes is the first game in the series to use an external engine, specifically Criterion's Renderware engine, the same engine used in the 3D GTA trilogy, the PS2 version of Rayman 2, most of the Burnout games, and Ninja Breadman. Clearly, the quality of the game depends less on the engine than the developer. The issues with the engine aren't with the engine itself. There are just as many great and iconic games made with renderware as shovelware titles nobody likes. The problem is that the developers didn't know the engine. They had less than 2 years and a handful of programmers working to make a brand new game with brand new mechanics on an engine they had no experience with for consoles they had barely had any with. The fact this game is glitchy and poorly programmed shouldn't be a shock. Physics are inconsistent. Clipping through objects is an issue. Several moments that seem like they should put you where you're supposed to be without input actually require ultra-precise movements to get in place. It's a mess. It's necessary to discuss all this before anything else because every other problem is made worse and every positive is held back, all by the game just not working well. What does it matter if the levels are incredibly well designed if at any moment you could be forced into an instant death pit through no fault of your own?
Can't wait for 06, I'm sure it's going to be great.
The game's main gimmick is character switching. Each team you play as has 3 different heroes to control, with fairly standardized controls between teams. There's the speed characters, Sonic, Shadow, Amy, and Espiel, who run the fastest, spawn tornadoes for enemies, and can homing attack enemies. There's the fly characters, Tails, Rouge, Cream, and Charmy, who can fly for a limited time and shoot their teammates and enemies. And finally, there's the power characters, Knuckles, Omega, Big, and Vector, who can break most obstacles, do the most damage to enemies, and can hover over gusts of wind for some reason. Each character type also has their own formation for the team. Speed formation lines them up behind the leader, fly formation has the leader carrying them all vertically, and power formation spreads them out side by side with the leader in the middle. It's an interesting idea, and they do try to make the most of it. Certain challenges can only be overcome by one formation, sometimes with alternate paths available depending on the leader. We have gates that will swap the leader to a predetermined type, though given you can just switch between them at will, it's functionally just the same as the signs that recommend which leader to use. They all also have pros and cons, drawbacks to their abilities. Speed is harder to control moment to moment, fly is easily the slowest, and power changes where the characters actually are constantly.
And for the record, that's a good thing for the game.
The other upshot for the game is the levels. We have 14 total, divided into 7 pairs that sort of feel similar to the act structure of the classic games. Most of these are good, though there are a couple that are really not. Casino Park and Bingo Highway in particular. Seriously, someone needs to tell Sonic Team that the things people want from a platformer and the things they want from pinball are completely different and incompatible. The pinball physics are so poorly made and obnoxious, and yet so over-present that it completely overshadows the decent platforming sequences between the tables. But otherwise, the seaside setting works great as a starter level, Metropolis is fun, if a bit repetitive at times, the canyon is broken but intense and has some good grinding sequences, the jungle is just about good enough with the frog gimmicks, and the castle is odd, but I kinda like it, and the Final Fleet levels are great finales in terms of theming and gimmicks, though the Final Fortress is one of the weaker levels to actually play. Overall, for all the pain that making these levels caused Azuka, I think they came out really well, and I'm genuinely impressed at how good they ended up being.
They aren't perfect, of course. I don't think any of the Sonic games have perfect level design the whole way through. But they are fairly fun overall, and I really do understand why some people really love this game. The level design is not the problem with this game, obviously. The problem is, well, playing all of them 4 damn times.
Team Sonic's campaign is pretty clearly the base campaign the others were built off of, and it's fine. The story is weak, just Sonic and friends trying to stop Eggman in a few days, but again, that's clearly intentional. It does work as its own story, just in the same way that, say, Sonic 3 works as its own story. The levels all feel balanced, not too easy like Sonic CD, but not too frustrating like Sonic 1. The bosses are fun, and if occasionally a bit button mashy or unbalanced. Some of the gimmicks are clunky, the bobsled is fun and flashy at first, but becomes clearly half-baked once the actual challenge is introduced. But still, the moveset feels good, with Sonic having most of his abilities from Adventure 2, plus the new triangle jump, and Knuckles having very satisfying beat-em-up controls. The power-up system is odd, the game really doesn't explain how it works, so you're just left to figure out how necessary it is for each character yourself, but once you do, it definitely works. The difficulty curve is kind of fucked, but honestly, if this one campaign was just released as the full game, I think this would go down as a very decent, if buggy and short, Sonic game.
Instead, we have to do 3 more campaigns for the true ending, because why not?
Team Dark is basically this game's hard mode, with them having tougher levels to get through. And by tougher, I mean in the same way Four Swords Adventures ramps up difficulty, they just throw more enemies at you with no regard for pacing. For some reason, I remember the Team Dark levels being longer than the Team Sonic levels, but they really aren't. They just have more enemies to fight, and a lot of harder enemies to deal with. It's not more engaging, it's just kind of more annoying. It's a way of making the campaign more difficult, technically, but it's not a way I'm particularly fond of. It's also held back by the Team Blast mechanic, which is intentionally overpowered for everyone, but especially for the non-Sonic teams. Team Blast is built up through certain actions, like destroying enemies, collecting rings, or spamming attacks. Activating it kills all enemies in a certain radius, along with at least one other bonus. For Team Sonic, it's just the ability to do the light attack for a bit, which is just as useless as Adventure 2. However, for Team Dark, Shadow uses Chaos Control, which stops time until the blast meter drops down again, which does neuter the final boss quite a bit.
To be fair, the Egg Emperor sucks anyways. So does the Egg Albatross, actually. I don't like the Eggman fights in this game. The Skyhawk is the best, but only because starter bosses are supposed to be pathetic.
Team Rose is listed after Team Dark on the Team Select, which is weird considering they are very much this game's easy mode. We start with a tutorial level that stops you whenever Omochao is talking, enemies are nerfed and occasionally cut entirely, and every level is cut almost in half in length. Their Team Blast is also the most overpowered of them all, killing enemies like usual, giving all 3 characters a free level, giving their leader a shield, and triggering an invincibility power-up for a time. Their story is incredibly unrevealing to the plot. You don't see Metal Sonic at all, you just hear him say that he's copied the Chaos data at the very end, so it's not clear that Sonic didn't actually kidnap a child and a frog. And to make things worse, Amy's moveset is just way too limited. She's the only speed character without a triangle jump. She can't do the light speed dash that Sonic and Shadow can. Her tornado is harder to control, and the only real benefit is that the tornado moves instead of staying in place, which just makes the spinning rod feel harder to time. Also, Big's only real aerial attack is slamming straight down with a belly flop, which is just really not great. It's all way too easy and way too clunky. Not a fan.
I actually started with Team Rose for this playthrough since I hadn't played the game in like a decade. I managed to get 9 out of 21 A ranks first try. Reminder, I suck at video games.
Last, but arguably not least, we have Team Chaotix, who are the weird playthrough of the game. Instead of just getting to the end of the level like the others, each level has a different objective. Collecting different items throughout the level, making it through the whole thing without being seen, killing all the enemies, or in the case of Rail Canyon, just getting to the end of the level. I actually really like Chaotix missions. They're not all winners, some of them are implemented in poor ways, but they feel like a nice side mode compared to the constant races that are the other modes. They're also generally the most lenient in terms of getting higher ranks, though the ranks in general are still annoyingly hard, and I'm not a fan of the characters' voice lines for C ranks and lower. But overall, I think the Team Chaotix campaign is good, at least if considered a secondary campaign. The story is also the only one that fully establishes Eggman's actual role in the plot, which is nice, though otherwise it's weirdly disconnected from the other plot lines. Like, Team Chaotix kind of just shows up to fight Team Dark and Team Rose whenever they aren't fighting Team Sonic. It's odd.
So, one decent campaign, one pretty good secondary campaign, and 2 campaigns I'd rather never play again. Not the best balance. However, you don't just need to play all 4 to unlock that last story. In addition, you need to collect all 7 Chaos Emeralds. These can be found in the special stages, another idea returning from the classic games. And I must once again reiterate, fuck this game!
Okay, so first, to access any of the special stages, you need to get to the end of a level with one of the keys you can find in each, which will disappear if you get hit even once, so you have to play almost perfectly between getting the key and reaching the end goal. In general, this means getting to the special stage is only really feasible as Team Rose most of the time, but additionally, you have to do this for the even number of stages specifically, because the special stages are directly tied to the stage the key was collected in, and for the odd-numbered stages, they just lead to bonus challenges that only give you extra lives. Once you get a key to the end of an even-numbered stage, you get an Emerald Challenge, where you have to race against a Chaos Emerald through tubes, which function similar to the half-lives from Sonic 2, the worst special stages in the classic games. The physics are extremely wonky, with characters rocketing left or right with even the slightest tap in that direction once they have enough speed, and you need to build speed with dash power, which is given by collecting specific spheres that are on the ground, but you have to avoid the bombs, which can be right next to the spheres. Sometimes you have to go on the walls or ceilings to get spheres, but you can also randomly fall off both of them, which completely stops your momentum, and if the emerald gets to the end of the stage, you have to do it all over again.
Can you tell I didn't like the special stages? I don't know if that was coming across. I'm not kidding. These stages were so goddamn annoying. I completely rage quit, like to the point of almost scrapping this whole project. I ended up coming back and grinding them out, but it was absolutely torturous, and the general jank and issues with the rest of the game really didn't help. For the first time in one of these projects, I had to just stop playing the game entirely for almost a full week, just so I didn't break something in frustration and annoyance. The third Emerald Challenge in particular is the absolute worst. They're pretty much all bad, but that one in particular seems to be the most glitchy, the most unpredictable, and just the worst. And the difficulty curve is even more fucked than Team Sonic's main campaign, which is just great. And all this rage, repetition, and struggle to unlock a final story that's just 2 incredibly lackluster boss fights.
To be fair, they do try with Metal Madness and Metal Overlord. Madness has 3 phases, where you fight him as Team Rose, Team Chaotix, and Team Dark. You have to change your formations depending on what kind of attack he's currently immune to, which is interesting enough, though considering some of the power formations can't hit him at all, and the speed formations are just incredibly risky to use. It's mostly just figuring out when you can spam the fly formations Thunder Shoot or not. And Overlord has all of Team Sonic going super, which is interesting, and the boss itself is more memorable than the Bio Lizard, but the atmosphere of just being in a random cloudy sky is a step back even from the Chaos fight, and you can only actually attack him with Team Blast, which negates a lot of the fun factor of previous final bosses. Then you beat him, Sonic says they're Sonic heroes, and everyone goes their separate ways until Shadow has his identity crisis in a year or two.
I grew up with this game. I really didn't have great luck with that, did I? Sonic Heroes is bad. There are good parts of it, I think the levels are mostly solid, and I can absolutely see why people like the character switching mechanics. However, having to play every level 4 times just brings the problems into sharper relief. The special stages bring things down so far, and almost everything outside of the gameplay is either too weak to be noteworthy or just outright bad. I know not everyone is going to agree with this, but I do really see this game as where the series started to go seriously downhill. And keep in mind, I didn't even like Sonic 1 or CD, and I think Adventure is charming but deeply flawed. Sonic Heroes is pretty easily the worst game in the series thus far. But I'm willing to bet it won't hold that title for long.